A question asked courageously, answered honestly, and lived authentically can change your whole life. For me, that question was, how can I use what I have, what I love, and what I know to bless the lives of others? The School for Good Living and this podcast are one answer to that question. Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I know that the world can work for everyone, but that it won't until it works for you. I've created this to help you make the difference you were born to make. It's a series of conversations with thought leaders who are moving humanity forward. And in each episode, I explore their lives and the work they do. I also ask them to break down how they've gotten their books written, published, and read. This podcast is all about exploring the magic and mystery, and sometimes the misery, of the creative process. So if you have a mission, a message, and the motivation to share it, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Hello, my friends. Today, my guest is Dr. Stephen Murphy-Shigematsu. He is a psychologist and has training in clinical and community psychology, yoga, meditation, and Chinese medicine. He holds a doctorate from Harvard University. He's been a teacher and counselor in Japan and the United States, working with all ages from daycare to medical school. He's also a Fulbright scholar. His current research is in the assessment of mindfulness in promoting personal well-being, leadership, and social transformation. I was privileged to find Stephen's book in the basement of the Strand bookstore in New York City. In it, he uses his personal experience to expand concepts that help us to transform ourselves, ultimately help us transform society using compassion. Stephen talks with me about the power of listening and how to be a more effective listener, what it really means. He also talks about actually seeing others and being seen, why it matters, how we can do it. Stephen talks a lot about this duality, this tension between serving our ego, which of course we all have, while remaining humble. So how do we walk that line between ego and humility? How do we share the things we know, the gifts we have with others in ways that makes a difference, while not letting it go to our head, not just being arrogant jerks? With that, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Stephen Murphy-Shigematsu. Stephen, welcome to the School for Good Living podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. I know when I reached out to you that we didn't know each other, but I found your book, From Mindfulness to Heartfulness, in the basement of the Strand bookstore in New York City when I was there last year. And it just called to me, and I've been reading it, and I really love this book.
Thank you. I'm glad you found it. And,
me too. One thing I want to share, I thought this was interesting. In the book, I did find it was gently used, and so someone had owned it before me. They had taken great care of it. There were no marks or anything. I thought it was interesting that inside the book is actually a prescription for someone. It has their name, of course, I won't read that, but it's referring them for ECT for TRD. And it just reminded me, if that's electroconvulsive therapy for treatment-resistant depression, that suffering is real, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So I think you're reaching a lot of people with this.
Yeah. I feel that a lot. I live a normal life. I work at a college, and I see students going through what appears to be a normal day, and yet if the space is created for them to really be present and vulnerable and open, then you just see the suffering that everybody is experiencing, but just doing their best to get through the day.
Yeah. It makes me think of what that saying, everyone you interact with is fighting a hard battle you know nothing about, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you the question that I like to ask all my guests at the outset. What's life about?
Wow. I was hoping for an easy one.
What's difficult about that?
Well, in some ways, it's perhaps the easiest question, right? You wake up every morning and ask yourself, well, okay, I realize I'm awake.
Yes.
I realize I'm alive. Now what do I do?
Exactly.
What's this going to be all about, that I get up, that I exist at all? And I have always a moment of doubt every morning when I wake up and think, well, what is this all about? And I don't know if I achieve clarity. I think clarity takes a while, and I have some rituals I go through. I make a chai every morning with grating fresh ginger and some seeds, cardamom and black pepper and cinnamon sticks, and so I have a ritual, and then I feel like my head is clearing somewhat, and then I start to. Often I read different things, or I say different things. So I have this like by my desk. It's from the Dalai Lama, and it's a reminder that simply you're alive and that your life is precious, and that you can do what you can today. Right? What can you do to use your energies to live the best you can with some kindness and compassion, and it may not be anything dramatic, and it may be something very mundane. What you're called to do is, there was a dog here, and feed the dog, let the dog take care of its biological needs, and I live with a partner, and I see what her needs are and what I might be able to do to meet those, and then I have a gift of writing, and so I often feel like, okay, what can you do with, well, maybe a more direct answer would be, I feel like I've been told by so many wise people of different kinds that it's to do the best you can with what you've got. So in a sense, to realize, who you are, what you've been given, what might be your unique purpose and for your existence, and then to do what you can to fulfill that.
Yeah. Well, that introduces a lot of questions about how we can know and, how we do it once we have an inkling and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And some of that I definitely want to ask about. One thing that I want to ask you is I want to ask a few questions about what your life was like growing up, and in particular your what I would call your cultural heritage. And I'm specifically interested to start with your grandmother, who's a prominent figure in your book. And you talk about the fact that she lived to be 111.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's some good genes right there, and probably some good fortune and taking care of herself. Will you share with me a little bit about your grandmother, what she was like, what you learned from her? Anything that feels appropriate?
To me, just her age in itself is very unusual. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and he said, and I never have, nobody ever lives to be 110. And I said, well, actually, I do know somebody and who lived to be that long. And there was something that was in Japanese. There's the word seimei ryoku, so it's this sense of life energy that she just had this tremendous power of just being alive, and that emanated from her. And I think I mentioned how when I was in my late 20s and feeling very lost in terms of what the point or purpose of my life was, I just had this very clear message. Maybe it's the time in my life I have felt the most clearly a message that I might call a spiritual, that something was very powerfully and very clear saying you should return home. And home to me meant Japan, but it also meant my grandmother. And there was something that was, I think, life sustaining about that. It was like, this is how you will renew yourself if you can get with this person who is somehow connected to you in some kind of a soul or spirit manner, which I couldn't define. But there was something there that was calling me to be with this person, who then welcomed me with open arms, and I felt like I was gradually absorbing or gaining some of this life energy that was, in some ways, was very disconnected from my own energy and my own life spirit, and that was just being with her enabled me to get some of that back. And it was like so the book is really an attempt to reflect on that process and to see what was happening at that time in my life, and how was this one person so influential in terms of teaching me things that seemed like important life lessons that and that have stayed with me, and now I feel like that's something I can pass on now to others.
Yeah. Well, and I think you've done such a wonderful job of sharing universal concepts in a very personal way and distilling, these chapters here about beginner's mind, vulnerability, authenticity, connectedness, listening, acceptance, gratitude, and service.
Yeah.
Right. And throughout sharing some of these stories and experiences. And one of them that I was really touched by was the one where you talk about when your grandmother came from Japan to the United States for a while to see if it made sense to care for her here. And I was really touched by your thoughtfulness and your family and supporting her that way, but ultimately her decision to return to Japan.
Yeah.
Will you talk? And what I was struck by the way, was this idea of how ultimately, we are individuals and we're part of something larger. Yeah. And it seemed like your grandmother had a real sensitivity to that and not wanting to burden your family. And will you talk a little bit about what that was like and about her decision ultimately to return to Japan?
Yeah, that I'm finding that experience had a very deep impact on me in terms of understanding what this whole, when we think about the self and we think about happiness and we think about, what is it that would make our lives good, that it's there's a lot cultural, clearly in that story. And I think it's, even if we separate it as this is Japanese and this is American, that's really false in the sense that we all, I think, are facing some kind of that dilemma of how much do we base our sense of self and our sense of happiness on something that is either individualistic or collective. And so that story about how we tried to find out what is the source of happiness for my grandmother really made things a lot clearer to me about how we, what you just described as that we are both individuals and we are also connected to others, and that we can't. So I think some of us are clearer about that we can't separate the two, and that if we try to, it's probably not going to lead us to great fulfillment. But connecting them is very complex too, and may lead us away from a lot of what our popular culture, or even the popular, Silicon Valley culture, or the whole cultures of achievement and accomplishment and power, and we get certain messages in that kind of a culture that tells us that I think deludes us that our happiness is really based on something individualistic, something very much about me. And what my grandmother's story taught me was that it's that I, or that me is, or even the you, is all something that is deeply connected to others. And so for my grandmother to ask her, what do you want? What's going to make you happy? We had a whole sense that she could answer that by saying, yes, me, this is what I really want as an individual. And she kept telling us, it's not possible for me to answer like that. Mm-hmm. But what makes me happy will be what makes everybody happy. If everybody can be happy, I'll be happy. Even if it looks like I'm sacrificing my happiness, but that's not really true.
And you mentioned in the book, I don't remember who it was you referenced, but you talked about just this simple but beautiful analysis of the Spanish word nosotros, right?
That's Gloria Anzaldúa,
Yeah, and how neat that is about, like, we, but breaking that down a little differently and showing, the power of language and looking at and thinking about, things that we maybe don't look at differently, and recognizing, acknowledging our individuality along with the collective that we're ultimately a part of.
Yeah, that's a beautiful word, I thought, to see that they are one, right? And that we're always separating us and them, and that how much there's suffering in that separation, and yet to see them as actually one was powerful in that word.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Well, one thing, if you're willing, that I would love to do with you and then invite our listeners at this moment to do, some of whom will probably be driving, others who may be folding laundry or, shoveling snow or who knows what they're doing. But I've never had the privilege of sitting in your classroom and being a part of the heartful spaces that you create. But I was hoping that you and I could, or that you, more appropriately, would be willing to do something right now that would help provide us the experience of heartfulness, if there's any kind of a short meditation or visualization or some other kind of process that we could actually do to create more than just a mind conversation, but invite an experience and more of a heart-centered experience.
Oh, okay.
How's that for putting you on the spot?
It really is, yeah. One of the things that I've found to be really useful is that sometimes I do it in a more dramatic way, like I wear a kimono and I come into the room and I speak in Japanese only, even though that's not expected. Or in Japan, I sometimes speak in Spanish a little bit. And so there are more dramatic forms of it, but I feel like something that I've started to do back when I was working with the U.S. Marines and the U.S. Navy in a more conservative environment in which I would not feel comfortable to do anything too strange. I would simply begin every presentation by saying, this is who I am and this is why I'm here. And that seemed to create a whole different sense about the feeling in the space and what was going to happen, what was happening already,
and what did you say?
Could happen.
This is who I am, and this is why I'm here. What do you say?
I think it was different every time, and there was no prepared. Well, I tried to prepare something, but in the moment, I would often say something different. So if I was to do that right now, I don't have anything prepared. I would say I'm simply a person who's trying to do my best with what I've got. I'm here. I'm here because I believe that there is some purpose to my life, and that if there's somebody like Brian gives me the opportunity, then I want to say yes. If somebody gives the opportunity to say, could you share what you are learning in your life with others, then I want to say yes to that, and that I'm here with both a sense of ego, that I have something to say, and also a sense of humility that I have nothing new to say to anybody really that's not been said already. But that I understand that often things need to be repeated, and we need to every day remind ourselves why we're here and what we can do. And so I'm here with that, in that spirit of kind of some disbelief, really. What I have lived is important to somebody else. That's kind of unbelievable, but it makes me feel that I exist too, because I feel like I'm being recognized. Somebody sees me, I see you. And the other thing that I often do in a class is that we do a simple exercise that we acknowledge each other's existence. And it comes from, I started to do it after I learned about a Zulu word, sawubona, which was taught to me as meaning that I see you. And it's used as a greeting by some people in South Africa. But that the deeper meaning is that I am not this solitary individual, but that I am with my ancestors. Go beyond this individual body of existence. And the same for you. When I see you, I see more than just your individual existence in that body, but I see you as part of something, other people, your ancestors, your people, and your communities. And so I ask people to get up and we walk around the room and we simply say either sawubona if you're comfortable with that, or if you have another word like namaste was a very similar type of meaning of simply that I, the divine in me, sees the divine in you. We recognize our existence. We bring each other into existence simply by seeing. So we walk around the room, and sometimes people say or sometimes they use the word hineni, I believe is the word, a Hebrew word meaning I am here. And so this simply acknowledging each other and walking on the room. And so I would look at Brian and say, I see you. And then you would say, I am here. And then you would do the same with me. I see you. And I would say, I am here. And what happens then is truly amazing. It's so simple. And then I ask people, what are you feeling? And they say, wow, I realized how much I want to be seen. That I feel so good just to be seen. I'm recognized. I know I exist. And one person even used the expression, there are no enemies. Wow. I realized there are no enemies when I can look into somebody else's eyes, even for a moment, and say, I see you, and they say, I am here. Then that whole sense of what we were just talking about, us and them, disappears behind that simple act of seeing and being seen.
That's amazing. It's really beautiful. And I was touched when I read that, and you share a little bit of that on page 101 of your book. And I love that response to Saubona, with the response meaning I am here. So this awesome exchange of meaning that by the act of seeing one another, we come into existence.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of a metaphysical thought, but experientially there's something very profound.
Yeah.
And really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
Now that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And then what comes in is the sense of responsibility. Right? If I see you and you see me, and we acknowledge that we are both here, then we also acknowledge the suffering that exists here.
Yeah.
I recognize that I suffer, and I see and you suffer, and then we have a way of coming together then, and a reason to be together, and that we can simply by that sharing something healing can occur.
Yeah. Do you mind if I borrow that for a workshop I do?
You can.
I want to try it. I know you didn't create it or anything, but
no, it's yours.
That's great. And what you said before about sharing something and having both ego and humility, I thought was, first of all, very honest, right? Yeah. And I certainly recognize some of that in myself. And it made me think about something I think was Andre Gide said, everything has been said before, but since no one was listening, it must be said again. Right. So, No, that's great. Well, the other thing God, there's two things that this conversation brings up for me. One of them is I really love, this is one of the things I love, is I studied Japanese for 5 years, and I was a student in an exchange for one academic year and lived with a host family. And I just love, first of all, I love in Japanese, whereas, in some of the Latin or Romantic languages, there's the distinction between masculine and feminine. Where in Japanese, I love that there's the sensitivity to animate or inanimate. Like if this is alive, you use a different verb to exist for something that's not alive, a book or something.
I see. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the sensitivity that's implied in that. And I also love I love that there's these kind of call and responses about tadaima and okaeri, like I'm here just now, welcome home. Right? Or I'm leaving, be careful, right? Kiotsukete, right? And our family, sometimes we bless our food. We have 6 kids, and we endeavor to eat together every night at 6 p.m. We're at the table.
Wow.
And so we don't always bless the food, but one thing we're sure to do is we always do offer the itadakimasu.
Really?
Something to acknowledge, the gratitude for all that is. And at the same time, how these things can become kind of formalities, right? Where we lose the deeper connection or the deeper meaning they might possess. But you talk about that a little bit, and I think that might point to the essence of what heartfulness is. But will you share with me why did the world need a book on heartfulness? And why did you write this book, From Mindfulness to Heartfulness? What does it mean, and why did you write it?
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm very deeply immersed in a mind world. I went through a lot of college, 10 years, and then even there, I was immersed in the world of the mind in terms of focusing on clinical psychology. So
Right.
my work
and
was
Stephen,
also.
if I apologize to jump in, but I just want to call out for our listeners that that's a very humble statement. But talking about earning a PhD at Harvard, yes,
I did, yeah,
right,
yes,
and now teaching at Stanford,
yeah,
right, and having also taught at the University of Tokyo.
yes.
So some pretty prestigious institutions that you've both learned and taught at. I just ended the sentence with a preposition, but that's pretty remarkable, and you're humble in what you're saying. But as you're mentioning, you live in a mind world. So I interrupted. Please continue.
Yeah, I guess I am. I really am not too impressed by myself, though, and I think part of the reason is my father never went to college, and I always, from childhood, I respected my father's knowledge and wisdom, and that was my grandmother didn't go to college, and so I didn't grow up with this. I grew up with a respect, but also some cynicism about what you'd learn at these places of the great elite institutions, and now having been part of them for over 30 years, I also have a very realistic sense of where wisdom is and where wisdom is not, and so
there is said. Very diplomatically phrased.
So it's because I am part of them, so I have to be careful about not disrespecting them as well. But
sure.
But I've been in this area of the mind for quite a long time, and being part of universities and then being part of the education system in which I had studied, though, I've worked with kids as young as 18 months old. So I was an early childhood educator, and I've looked at how early can you go to influence people's development. And so I've looked at the whole life range, and I really have seen education over the long course, and have felt, as in universities, how much we are in focusing on the mind, meaning cognitive, rational, logical, analytical discourse and debate or argumentation, and a sense that of emptiness that I was finding particularly in college classrooms, about what we saw as the highest forms of knowledge and wisdom, and how you would transmit that knowledge from one generation to another generation, and then, of course, reflecting on my own experience as a board student, no matter where I was, until I got to Harvard, actually, where I met some really amazing teachers. But my own sense of boredom as a student, and then it was also stimulated somewhat by a crisis that I encountered at Stanford, which was when I could see students really going through incredible mental health issues, and that it was jarring only in the sense that our social image about what success is gives us this strange impression that if you achieve a certain success, then your life is good and life is happy and life.
What were some of the things that you saw when you got there that concerned you?
That students were deeply unhappy, and that students were feeling very lost, and not feeling a sense of purpose. And often they had gotten to that place in their life and that level of achievement by focusing on solely on achievement and the single-minded pursuit of their individual achievement. And as freshmen, they start to see some cracks appear in that vision of life. And by the time they're a senior, there's a lot of cracks, and some students get them more quickly than others. But there's a deep sense of that. Is this all what it's all about? Is this all there is? Yeah. So I felt a need to provide something more than that in a way that would be available to a lot of students. I had previously worked clinically, which is a lot of working one-to-one with people in an intense manner. And I wanted to use that those skills or that way of teaching in a setting that would be people could move quicker and more people could move together, and I felt that could be done in a healing circle. So if we could get people together in small groups and to simply connect with ourselves better, be more open, authentic, and vulnerable, that would create the connection with others, and that would help people to heal faster, more quickly than if I was with one individual working with them, and then they had to, okay, now how do you go out and apply this in the world? We have the circumstances right there in the classroom, and so there was a general sense of moving from the mind, all of our focus on our thoughts and our cognitive processes, to more of something that it was deeper and more heartfelt. And that's a quick explanation of what the title means and why I was moving in that direction. And, certainly that feeling that was what is needed in the world that I could see.
Yeah. No, in the last chapter of your book where you write, I sense that my responsibility to my students is to encourage them to live a balanced life. Right?
Yeah.
And I love that as an alternative to what is taught in our business schools around the world, but especially in the United States, about maximize shareholder value at all costs, right? and really, I think if we're really honest about it, the destructive nature of unmitigated capitalism to environments, to people, this kind of thing. And so I'm really glad to know that you're making this endeavor to help students live a balanced and meaningful life of responsibility. One thing that I'd like to explore with you here is you talk a little bit about the concept of balance and how it's different in a Western sense from a Japanese approach to balance. Will you talk a little bit about how you see the difference in the way those two, I know that's grouping a broad culture, but in the distinctions, and then what that means for how we might approach achieving balance? Yeah.
I know I've written about that. I've written about it for quite a few years, and I feel like I'm still finding clarity every day in what does that really mean. And because the whole idea of maintaining two different ways of seeing things or of acting at the same time is something that seems so contradictory to our sense about how you must decide it's either this or it's that.
Right.
And that seems, I feel it much stronger certainly in the United States than when I live in Japan. But I think it's still a very difficult concept to gain every day when we are called to make decisions about things and to stay where we stand on things. And but it's something I keep bringing up over and over in my teaching, because it's something that we seem to need to figure out almost on a constant basis of what. So the other day in class, I was talking about how do you this concept of arugamama. So arugamama meaning this sense of acceptance of this is the way I am. This is who I am. This is the way I am. If I can accept it, then that could be the source of liberation to being more than what I am. So that sense of paradox of, whereas often in the Western psychotherapy context, we're taught the opposite. How do you want to change yourself? Let's look at what's preventing that change. Let's analyze it. Let's figure out a solution to how you're going to change yourself. And, in Japanese therapy, an indigenous therapy that goes back to the time of Freud and Jung, it was an acceptance therapy. It was, how can you accept, how can you have this feeling of arugamama, that this is who you are, and that's okay. And that can you hold, so in the sense of balance, can you hold that feeling and at the same time feel that you want to be more, or that you can be more, or that you will try to be more, or that you will, in a more pure sense, that you will the energy will naturally be released for that positive movement.
That's such an interesting paradox about learning to accept ourselves, or perhaps even love ourselves completely, exactly as we are right now, with no conditions, yet also recognizing that more is possible. We can become more. We can give more. We can do more.
Yeah, and I only can teach that because I have experienced it, and then I see students experience it and tell me like, wow, it's amazing. It's so strange because that if I tell myself to love myself, to feel compassionate, to be kind to myself, this is who I am, then I feel somehow liberated to be different and to do more than that. So like in the first class, I tell the students, you don't have to talk this whole course for 10 weeks and you will not be negatively evaluated. And they write that in their journals that, wow, when you said that, I was just so relieved because I've spent so much of my energy into thinking, not listening to other people, but simply formulating what I'm going to say because I know that's what the teacher wants. The teacher wants to hear what my opinion is, and it doesn't have to be based on what anybody else has said. I don't need to listen, but I just need to be ready to talk. So being told I don't have to talk, I just felt so relieved. And then one wrote, and then I talked more than I have talked in all 4 years at Stanford.
Wow. Well, you gave them, there's something really liberating about being accepted as we are, right? And for what we want and don't want and all that. So I think that's only something, someone whose mother, because you write about this also in the book, that your mother never said she loved you.
Yeah.
Right? Not because she didn't love you, but will you talk a little bit about that, about not needing to say things, and maybe about your mother not needing to say even, I love you? Yeah,
that's, I think it was especially noticeable because of the cultural context, which is then in the United States, and then with a very verbal father who was still, had broken out somewhat from his he was only a second generation Irish. So there was not a lot of expression, but he himself was very expressive. And so to see that, the difference between the way my mother rarely said anything and the way my father was so expressive, and then to see friends, and their mothers, telling their kids, I love you at the end of a conversation. And, it was, I think at times it was confusing, but it was something that I learned really, as I grew up. As I learned, especially as I lived in Japan more, to see that this was a very powerful way that a belief that things really could not be expressed in words, so that when I read later the famous haiku poet Basho, right? Basho, is that the name?
Yes.
Basho.
Matsuo Basho.
Matsuo Basho, yeah. Of a statement he apparently made was, what's the point of saying everything with words? And I thought that was beautiful because it shows both, this sense of futility that you can never find the word that could really express completely, and yet you never stop trying, right? You keep, that's all and it's like, that's what life is like in the sense, right? Yeah. You can never find completeness, but you keep going anyway.
Yeah, that makes me think of something I've heard attributed to Gandhi. My life is my message.
Yeah,
right. Like what a beautiful perspective. Well, speaking of not needing to talk and of listening, I know this is something that you teach your students, and you mentioned a mentor that you had at Harvard, Kyo Morimoto, who taught you a lot about listening. Will you tell me a little bit about your mentor and what you learned from him, and specifically as it relates to listening?
Yeah. Kyo Morimoto was a Nisei. His parents came from Wakayama, Japan, and he was a potato farmer in Pocatello, Idaho, and then the war broke out, and he decided that his response would be to join the military and to prove that he was a real American, and that other Japanese people here in the United States were real Americans, and he was willing to sacrifice for that. And
it's a pretty magnanimous expression, I think.
I think so, and it refers back to, you said earlier, I encourage my students to live a balanced life, and in reality, I question whether that's really enough. And the other day in class, I was saying, maybe balance is not all you're looking for. Maybe if you really discover your purpose, if you really discover a belief that you have a mission, that's what you're here for, then that could lead you into more danger than the simple comfort of a suburban life around, where everything seems balanced and you've got everything under control. And that's the danger, I believe, of really being mindful and heartful and being focused and hearing a calling. That calling could be one of danger, not one that you choose.
Yeah, it's certainly part of the hero's journey, right? The call to adventure.
That's the hero's, yeah. And you're going to say yes or no.
Yeah, or stay small. Yeah.
Yeah. So where were we?
So we were talking about a potato farmer who decided to join
the potato
war.
farmer, right? Okay. So he decides he's willing to risk his life to do this, and but he survives the war. He's traumatized, but he then gets the GI Bill and goes to Harvard, becomes the head of the counseling center there. And so by the time I got there, he was teaching counseling, and what impressed me was the way he would tell students over and over again, just repeat, you're not listening. And it was, very frustrating to many of us because first of all, when you get to that level of thinking you're going to be a PhD level Harvard psychologist, that you assume that's all about analyzing, diagnosing, and then prescribing and treating, and that it's all about some kind of knowledge that you're going to be gaining that is not really in the heart. And he kept repeating, when you do that, you're not listening. You've got to start there. And if you're not even starting there, then the patients and clients will recognize that, and you won't connect to them. And so you've got to at least begin there. And so a lot of the students dropped out because they realized how hard it was to listen, and what they really didn't want to listen. They wanted to simply, analyze or to tell other people what to do. And so it impressed me, and I felt there was something very deep in the connection with Japanese culture as well that was enabling him to stay with that position of providing simply the presence for us, and a holding place for people to be, and that was what we had to at least provide that for anybody to feel that was a healing space.
I think that's such an amazing perspective, especially as one who, and maybe this is very, very common, but find my attention, wanting to divide my attention frequently, wanting to brush my teeth while looking at my messages, right? Wanting to drive while talking on the phone, not wanting to sit and eat. And certainly when I'm with another person, not wanting to be fully present many times with whatever it is they're saying or what the experience is. And as you write in your book, that Kyo believed that the most important thing we could do was to be fully present as possible in each moment with the client. He taught that without being seen where we are, humans find it hard to move.
Yeah.
Right? There's just something amazing. And then you talk a little bit in here about the character, the Chinese or Japanese character for, I guess this is the Japanese kanji for kiku, to listen. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right? Will you talk a little bit about some of the elements that are present in this character or this word in Japanese? I thought that was pretty amazing. Yeah, the character is, I think it reveals a lot. And that's something I've enjoyed, is to look at the characters and their what they could have meant to the person who constructed them. And that one, so the one for, it's often distinguishing between hearing and listening. The hearing one simply has a ear in it. And so you get a sense that if you can actually mechanically hear something, then that's one particular way of being with somebody else. But the more complicated character has not only the ear, but it also has a mark for 10, which indicates like maximal attention, and then an eye, which indicates that you can use all your senses to really listen.
picking up on nonverbal things and all kinds of nuances in voices. And then there is also the number 1, which indicates a kind of focus, concentration. And then there's a heart. So the heart indicates the sense of heart-to-heart communication, and that the sense of all that can go beyond words in terms of how we can simply portray our true human emotion, which goes back to your question about my mother, and that she would never say, "I love you," and she would instead do things like give me when I finished my piece of meat, she would take it from her plate, what was left, and put it on my plate. And so there was a clearly a sense of heart to heart communication that didn't need to be said. And and some of the older forms on the the left side, there's also the character for king, which indicates that it's the king, the leader. Leadership really involves listening, because you never know completely everything that's out there to know. But if you're a good listener, people will come to you and tell you, and you will have all this knowledge then if you are a good listener.
Yeah, I thought that was so amazing. And I love also that you point out that of all the elements present in this, about the ear, the ten, the eye, the heart, this, but there's no mouth. There's no mouth present in Kiku.
Yeah.
So,
Kiku.
No, that's great. So how can we become better listeners? We know it's important to leadership. It's important, especially if we're in some of the healing disciplines, to really see and hear our clients, to help them move from wherever they are to what's possible for them. But as a practical matter, especially, right, when Kyo's saying over and over to you, you're not listening. You're not listening, right? And you're like, yes, I am. Yes, I am. But what can we do? What can people listening, what can I do to be a more effective listener?
So, I teach what's called mindfulness or heartfulness. But I'm told that I teach it in a different way than a lot of other people do, even at Stanford. And that what students say is that it's a way that rather than focus simply on meditation or the kind of rituals, that I view it simply as the foundation of a way of being, and that way of being is a way that if we can be in that way together, then we create the place that would lead to something like good listening. So simply being there, finding yourself present, being there with a beginner's mind, starting there, and then to moving to places of vulnerability, that sense of sharing. Can you share yourself with others? And you're more likely to be able to do that if you can see them. So certain exercises like that at the beginning I find very helpful for people to not only feel grounded, but to feel the sense about that they are to help get themselves out of their own space. And so simply to connect to another person and to say, I see you, and I realize you are here. And when I realize that, I realize that you suffer, and I realize that I am here and I want to be here for you. And so I feel like it starts to break down some of those barriers, and that it's we don't have to keep telling ourselves to listen, but that it can come naturally out of that sense of that if I see you and I see that you're suffering, then I want to listen. And so that there's this Suzuki Shunryu, who popularized Zen in the U.S., he has a statement that the compassionate mind comes from beginner's mind. And so that from beginner's mind, compassion naturally flows. So if you can actually be present, you will feel both the desire, you'll be more aware of yourself, but also more connected to the other, and that you will want to listen. It will be just something that will come more naturally from you.
No. And it's something that you write in the book I hadn't heard before, so I'm grateful. And I'm grateful for how much, by the way, that you included from so much learning from so many different sources and cultures. But talking about this concept of compassion, and as a result of beginner's mind in this, you mentioned this statement the Dalai Lama makes about if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as we see, a beginner's mind, being present, listening are all doorways to that. Because you make a distinction. You pointed something else out that I hadn't heard before about compassion. And you talk about perspective taking, and you talk about, I think you called it something like intellectual compassion, as kind of distinguished from, I don't know, true compassion or some kind of an emotional compassion. Will you talk about that for just a moment?
I'm not sure what it may have been more using the word empathy.
Okay.
And the way that psychologists distinguish different kinds of empathy, and then also the distinction between empathy and compassion. So in my clinical training, I was taught that you needed to have empathy, and you needed to connect to your clients, and but we were also told to have distance, so that you were supposed to have an appropriate kind of empathy. And although that seemed to me at the time felt very cold and professional, and I remember feeling I rejected it, and I feel like, no, that's not. What is this professional compassion? And it doesn't fit with why I wanted to be in this profession, in this field. But I've come to, and now there's more research that supports this distinction between how somebody can actually be more helpful if they have this particular distance. So a particular kind of empathy, or some people call it that compassion, and they call the other one empathy, meaning the empathy as when you get into the same feeling as the other person, which therefore then puts you in a position of not being able to be as helpful to that person because you're down there with them.
That's right. And this was, so on page 106 and 107, you talk about this, that sometimes we engage in, or what's possible for us, is what psychologists call cognitive empathy. Others might call it perspective taking, which simply consists of knowing how the other person feels and imagining what they might be thinking.
Yeah.
But the limitation to that is that people could be really talented in that regard with having no real concern for other people. So cognitive empathy alone is often insufficient to create genuine connectedness.
Yeah.
Right? And then what you go on to say, and this I starred because I thought it was so amazing, about experienced meditators. So scientists have studied, scientists. I'm convinced scientists study everything. Now they get a grant from somewhere and study every last thing. But this was fascinating, that experienced meditators, when they encounter suffering in another person, the meditator's brain show heightened activities in areas that are important to things such as caring, nurturing, establishing positive social affiliation. But in non-meditators who experience the same stimuli, who are subject to the same inputs, the areas of the brain that are triggered them associate with unpleasant feelings like sadness and pain.
Yeah.
So that's amazing that this heartfulness, this mindfulness practice can actually change us in some way, like physiologically, that our natural, innate response without trying, right, is one that is more nurturing, caring, conducive to actual connectedness and not, so the difference there between compassion and empathy, I thought, is, again, it's like a really fine nuance, but I never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's an interesting distinction.
And I think it relates back to your question about, how do we listen better, right? And how do we get ourselves to listen better? And that it's, like you just said, that the practice of mindfulness is something that can help us to be better listeners, because we can listen in a way that we don't just go into that feeling or distance from the feeling, but that we actually feel things in a way that we are able to then respond in a way that is can be helpful to the other person.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it makes me think of something I heard Sadhguru say when he says, we do not meditate, we become meditative. Right? Yeah. And in this way of like, how do you become a better listener? To me, this calls to mind that saying I've heard attributed to Muhammad Ali about champions aren't made in the ring. They're merely recognized there. meaning,
Yeah.
right? There's no trick. I'm thinking like, yeah, there's like, I think especially like busy executives, they just want to know, what's that saying about if you can fake it, the secret is authenticity, right? If you can fake that, you've got it made kind of thing. There's no trick to listening, but as this research is pointing to, what helps us be better listeners and other people experience us as better listeners is all the hard work we put in before we ever got in that metaphorical ring, before we ever engaged in that interaction with another person. There's no life hack, I think, probably, to being a better listener. But how do you see that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if, I think it relates to the whole ideas about meditation and mindfulness, like the distinction. And like I personally don't do a lot of meditation. I meditate every day, but I don't do hours and hours of it, and I don't even go on long retreats. But I'm seeking to be more mindful and to be more meditative in my daily life, and that. And I see the value, so I've been studying more at Zen temples in Japan, and I'll do some small retreats there, and I study with the monks, and so I'm studying that and I'm practicing it. But for me personally, I feel that what I want most is to put this meditative, mindful state into action in my daily life, and so I do feel that urge to somewhat to go to those places of contemplation to the degree in which they can guide and nourish my actions in the world. And
I think that's so great, and that calls to mind a quote. I might get this a little bit wrong, but you quoted, I think it's Dag Hammarskjöld. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, about the path to sainthood lies through action. Yeah. It's like it's pretty cool. It's not just about getting in a mountaintop or in a temple or a cave somewhere. Like any idiot can be peaceful alone in a quiet room, right? But the real discipline is carrying it through every moment of our lives.
Yeah, and we often, I think, there's a trap of the other way of thinking, which is that if there's a very funny videotape or YouTube of somebody leading a meditation, and they're saying, it's not important how long you meditate. It's important how long you say you meditate.
That sounds like J.P. Sears, the ultra spiritual.
Okay.
That's so funny. That's great. Okay, so I want to switch gears a little bit with you and go into the lightning round. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Question 1. Please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a
journey on a ship to nowhere.
Okay. Next question. What's the best news you've heard recently?
That you wanted to interview me.
Okay. Next question. What's something at which you wish you were better?
I wish I was better at just singing without feeling embarrassed.
Okay. Next question. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a T-shirt with a slogan on it, or a phrase, or a saying, or a quote, or a quip, what would the shirt say?
It would have no words. It would have my book cover. It would have the kanji for the book cover. That heartful one.
I love it. All right, next question. What book, other than one of your own, have you gifted or recommended most often?
The one that you just mentioned, Dag Hammarskjöld. And he has a book called Markings, which I think is full of remarkable sayings about ego and humility and spirit.
And I did not realize he earned the Nobel, was it the Peace Prize posthumously?
Yes, right.
Wow, yeah. Amazing. Okay, I've not looked at that book yet, but I will. Check it out.
Okay.
Why is that book something that resonates with you? I mean, I heard what you said is in it, but
Yeah.
why him? Why that book?
I think it's the way we started out today when I talked about the ego and humility. And because Hammarskjöld is somebody who was at the highest levels of society, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and yet his writing is about this constant battle between his humility and his ego, in the sense of feeling called to do, that he was on a mission, and in his case, even to sacrifice his life for his work. And yet also this other humility that if God calls me at any moment to say, this is it, this is all you're going to do, then I'm willing to say, okay, that's it as well. And this is all I was able to do in this lifetime. And, so the writings express that for me, which is a constant battle of how much I want to write a book, and I write the book, and I want to feel proud I wrote the book, and I want people to read the book, and yet I'm also saying, well, there's nothing new in that book. Those 8 principles, everybody knows those 8 principles already. And how many people are writing books on mindfulness? And I'm not going to. I hate self-promotion, and all that stuff comes in too. But so for me, it's when you enter into this world of projecting your thoughts and ideas into the world and saying there's a value, then that constant battle comes into about humility. And so I find his writings very powerful.
Yeah. No, I would definitely check that out. And just hearing you share about that balance of the ego and humility, and also, not maybe feeling comfortable or not liking self-promotion. I'm reminded of something I heard Tony Robbins say in an interview about something he realized in his early years, where he said, I knew from an early age, if I didn't become a master marketer, my ideas would die on my lips.
Yeah.
And I thought that is amazing that he connected his mission and propagating, his ideas that he knew could contribute to others with, his willingness to go out and be an incredible self-promoter,
Yeah. Yeah. And
so I don't know if he's found that balance, but he seems like he's doing all right.
I think it's in the book, but the statement from Rabbi Hillel, going way back in history, that the 3 words, the 3 sayings, if I am not for myself, then who will be? If I am only for myself, then what am I? And if not now, when? And I find that very powerful, just to, that realization that, of course, you have to be for yourself and your own survival and your own flourishing. And that, but if that's all you're about, then what are you as a human being? And if you can't put things into action, then you will certainly not find fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Oh, yeah.
So you travel, I imagine, as a teacher. And so you travel a ton, or you have. What's one travel hack, something you do, or maybe something you take with you when you travel to make your travel more enjoyable or at least less painful?
I've started to carry a Seiza bench, a portable Seiza bench, so that it collapses and then I can pull it out, and so I can sit on the floor now. Because I've fractured both hips over the years now, and I can't sit cross-legged on the floor for very long. So I have this, instead of saying I can't sit, I actually have a little wooden bench that I carry, and I can sit anywhere, anytime, very comfortably.
Wow. And are you standing now? You look like you might be standing.
So I stand more. I try not to sit.
So your Apple Watch, if you have one, you close that ring every day. No problem.
I don't have one.
Yeah, there's a little circle that it prompts you to stand so often in a day.
Oh, yeah. I don't need that. I'm always standing.
Apple looking out for us, but okay. Next, a Seiza bench. Something else you do that's kind of either a ritual or you don't leave home without it, or
I carry my pajamas because
in your carry-on.
I always. Oh no, I'm not on the airplane. No, but I will. I like to carry pajamas. So, in Japan, of course, many places provide a yukata, so you don't really need them. But I've come very particular about wanting to have a certain consistent comfort of a particular kind of pajamas that are I carry with me. So,
What are the pajamas?
well, I have a new one actually, which is they're made of organic cotton in Japan, and
Wow.
they're like extremely soft, and they are very comforting. And so I give into that sense of physical comfort and how that's important in a daily sense to help me to get to sleep, even to say, okay, now I've got these clothes on, and this is time for sleep.
Yeah, no, that's great. What's one thing you started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
I started to put more discipline into my life, to have a more regular life. That was when I was younger. I was more would go freer with felt freer to go with whatever was happening, and feeling like that was the direction I would find the most discovery in life and the most fulfillment. And as I've been aging, I'm realizing how that is difficult to maintain that kind of a lifestyle. And so I have a much more disciplined, regular lifestyle, and see the benefits of doing that as I age.
What are some of those disciplines?
Go to sleep, go to bed at night, instead of feeling that whatever's happening could be really interesting, and this could be the discovery that I'm looking for, and to tell myself that the day is over, and that you have to accept that this is all you're going to do today. Mm-hmm. And maybe you were hoping for more, or but that this is all that you are able to do today, and accept that and go to bed.
You'll live longer that way, I think.
I think so.
Yeah,
yes.
Research suggests.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. What's one thing you wish every American knew?
How lucky you are to be alive. And maybe it's that simple, just to cherish your life, and to believe that your life has a purpose, and that you can every day do your best to fulfill that purpose.
Yeah, I wish every American knew that as well. Yeah. Even if they don't all agree, just knowing that. Okay.
Yeah.
What's something that you learned from your parents or maybe a grandparent? Is there any advice or anything you observed, them doing that has really made an impact on you in a way that stayed with you? Like you think about a lot. It's a part of your daily life. Anything like that?
Maybe it's the what goes back to your question about balance, which I didn't really answer, but it was this. I think it was a sense of seeing the stark contrasts, which in my case are also very visual, between the Irish side of the family and then the Japanese side of the family, and the very different ways in which they lived, and that simply that they were, and that was. I could see the beauty in each, and the value in each. I think just by living, and to see that people can live differently, but that there are just different expressions of how we all might live, and that might be because people are different, and that. Yeah. But to be open to that realization that we could all be living good lives in a different way.
Wow, what a gift. Yeah. That's great. Okay, so right here, before we transition into the portion where we talk about writing, okay. I want to say this to make sure that we get to it. Two things. First of all, I want to let you know that as a small token of my gratitude, I have made a microloan on your behalf through kiva.org, which started right there at Stanford, where you are, to an entrepreneur in Ecuador. So it is a woman named Sandra Zimena, that she will use this money to buy a computer to further her nursing studies and for her kids' schoolwork. So anyway, her dream is for her family to have the opportunity to improve their quality of life. So in some way together, I like to think we're doing that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Good. So Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, thank you.
And then the other thing I want to put here to make sure that we do it and not try to squeeze it in at the end, is if people want to connect with you or they want to learn more from you, what should they do?
I have a website, and I put a blog on there maybe once a week, and they could subscribe to the blog. I will have very shortly a site about something that I just started called the Stanford Heartfulness Lab, and so that will go up pretty quickly, and people can see the work there. But a lot of it's already on the website. But the lab site will have more Stanford specific information about what I'm doing through the university. But those are the best ways, and then from there they can see that I have an email address too on the website that they could contact me.
That's great. And will you tell us, and I'll put it in the show notes so people can find it easily who want to do that, but will you also be willing to say what the URL is for the website for anybody who's just listening now? Oh,
yeah. It's simply the whole name, Murphy-Shigematsu.com.
Okay. No hyphens? It's
no hyphens, yeah.
So, and then Shigematsu. So Murphy is just what it sounds like, Murphy. Shigematsu is Shigematsu.
Yes, .com.
.com.
Yeah.
That's right. And, of course, people can find your books on Amazon.com or hopefully at their local bookstore.
Hopefully, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's I have just a few questions for you as it relates to writing.
Okay.
So what do you want to say about writing? Maybe I should quit asking you and just let you say whatever you want to say. I do have a few questions, but if I just opened up a space to talk about writing, would you step into it?
Yeah.
What would you say?
I like to write. And then I immediately felt that's actually not true. I feel called to write, and I feel that it was... I was told fairly early in life that I write well, and that I therefore should want to write, or that I should write. But I found that from that point it was natural to write and to feel the satisfaction in writing, and so I feel it more than that sense of I like to write. That it feels that I'm. That somehow that's part of who I am and what I need to do, and that when I do it, I do feel a healing quality in the writing, and I also feel the satisfaction that I think perhaps any artist or craftsperson feels, or anybody who can produce something with their hands. I feel the satisfaction that I have left something behind in the world too that is very concrete, and that it's so I continue. I've written now for a few years, and I continue to write and see it as just an integral part of my life that I do on a daily basis.
Some kind of writing every day.
Some kind, yeah, and that, wow. But that varies quite a bit depending on the intensity of the process, where I am in the process, what I'm writing for, and in terms of a book, of course, there are waves in terms of how much writing is being done, and sometimes a lot, and sometimes not much.
I want to check this out in your experience to see if I'm unique in this, or if this is your experience as well. But I have a love-hate relationship with writing, and and you do talk in your book also about flow, which I appreciate. Yeah. And I love when I get past my inertia, and I'm into it, and I manage to get into a flow state. But I feel like I'm fighting myself to get to that point. But what I want to check out with you is it your experience as well that the act of writing never gets easier? I mean, your quality of your writing might get better, but the act itself is often, maybe almost always, like painful in some way, but then it's also gratifying, especially when you're done. Is your experience something similar to that, or something different?
Yeah, and I think that's why I reacted immediately when I said I like writing, because I don't like writing, and because it does feels like that. to me also. And so when I hear people talk about writing a book, I have a very complex reactions often, which is one is that I don't believe everybody has the ability to write a book, and that can come across as arrogant that some people. But I think it's the reality. Some people write well, and some people don't write well enough to write a book. But more I react to the feeling that I feel like many people think it's something you like to do and you can do easily. Yeah. Whereas to me, it's something that requires incredible effort to do it, and that a lot of those periods are difficult periods. And the way that I think I write and many people write is that it forces you to go very deep within yourself and to to really wrestle with some demons and to come out with something that is often difficult to produce, because it comes from a place of it could come from a place of trauma, could come from a place of deep sorrow. It could, but I often find that the best writing comes from a very deep place that is hard to go to and hard to stay with. And
yeah. It does remind me a little of the tiny bit I've learned about shamanism. This concept that a shaman is merely someone who goes out and brings something back, right? And so reaching deep into parts of ourselves, our experience, or maybe even the collective unconscious, or maybe a superconscious if it exists, going beyond that, and then bringing whatever gifts or messages might be back. I know that can sound really metaphysical and like crap too, perhaps. But what do you think?
It's a bunch of crap, Brian. No, I when you were saying that, it really made me aware of that the state I go into almost is a kind of altered state of consciousness. That it really does require, like when I look at what I've written, if I look at it right now, I'm amazed often. I say, I wrote that? What kind of a state of mind was I in when I wrote that? Because right now I don't feel like I'm in that place at all. In a normal daily life, I don't feel like I can access that place. But a lot of my writing occurs very early in the morning. And I often get out of bed without my head might still be very foggy, or my eyes may have difficulty opening, but my mind is so clear and so sharp, and it's in places I don't go for the rest of the day. It's in these places that are somewhere related to subconscious or the unconscious and it's got some incredible clarity and depth that I see later when I look at the writing, but I don't, and I realize I don't go there all the time in every day.
Yeah, it makes me think about this kind of concept. I remember reading about Jung having the sense that there was an old man, right? That inside himself was some kind of an old man from an early age. There was the child that he was, and then this elderly figure inside himself. And I think about this idea of that there definitely seems to be some kind of intelligence that is part of who we are, right? That's guiding our respiration, our digestion, all of our nervous system that we don't consciously control for the most part. And I wonder, when and how, when we can cross into accessing or tapping into that or partnering with, playing with that, allowing it through. When you say you write early in the morning, how early are you talking about? It's like 5 a.m. sunrise?
I can often no, I can go from 3:30, but I often resist because I know that I haven't gotten enough sleep.
Yeah.
But my mind is ready, but I often force myself to stay there, and I often can have productive writing going on in my mind for maybe another 30 minutes or an hour. The best periods I will get up about 4:30 maybe, and that gives me a few hours before when I had kids going off to school or dogs to take care of. I would still have a few hours that I could work, and so for me it has to be very early.
When you write, do you prefer silence or some kind of soundtrack?
Silence.
Silence is its own soundtrack, right? But you prefer silence.
Yes, I can't write with music.
And do you like to write in a private space, like in your home or in an office, or do you like to be around people, like in a cafe or something like that?
I always write in a private space. So I quiet and private.
And when you write, what kind of rituals, if any, do you have? Do you have, light a candle, brew some tea, wear a certain robe, anything like that?
No, I always have tea. Yeah, I always have tea, and then I'll often read something first, and it may be very short, like the what I showed you with the Dalai Lama, The Precious Human Life, or I get things into my mailbox, and it's very tricky though if you go into your computer.
You get sucked in.
But I get things like the Tricycle Review, I think it is, or the Daily Good. I get these really inspirational writing can come in, and if I feel stuck, I may go to something like that. But I often will get something very short, like to read, and I'll read a little bit, and then I'll go to the writing. So sometimes that works, and that's if I don't have a clear thought already. But if I jump up and I'm ready and I've got the clear thought, then I can just go right to it but I always get the tea first. Yeah.
Who has inspired you or taught or guided you in your journey to be a writer? And what have you learned from them?
There's a couple of people that I think especially, there's the Jesuit Henri Nouwen, Nouwen, that I've known since the days of studying to be a counselor, and that I found that the writing, another writer, Parker Palmer. So two people who have written with us, I feel, dealing with that sense of vulnerability, humility, and also ego, the ego to be able to believe you have book after book to write and to publish and to tell the people about the book. And but I found those books to be very helpful for me to encourage me to write with vulnerability and to not fall into the trap of needing to be the expert and the person that or to write in a best-selling way, to write in a way that is clearly saying that you, emphasizing to me that you have something more important than other people to say. And I feel like they're two writers who have written with a good sense of keeping both perspectives on their writing.
Yeah.
And
Henri, so Nouwen. Am I
Nouwen,
saying his
yeah.
name right? Henri Nouwen. You actually quoted 4 lines from him in your book that I wrote a while by. I didn't write by a lot. I underlined a lot, but I didn't write.
Oh.
But when you say, so his words, so healing. Now, I had to read this like 5 times, and then I texted it to a friend, and we talked about it, truly. But he said, so healing is the receiving and full understanding of the story, so that strangers can recognize in the eyes of their host their own unique way that leads them to the present and suggests the direction in which to go.
Wow.
And this thing about receiving, first of all, telling stories, receiving a story, the wisdom that the teller of the story already has in finding their own way to go, right? But you being the person that makes that possible for them and all that. So it's a bit of a sidetrack, except when you mentioned his name, I wanted to acknowledge that part of what you shared really touched me.
Yeah.
And the other thing it brings up is story, right? Because I've talked a couple times that you use story, personal story, and pointing to other stories very powerfully. And as we know, there's something really primal that we connect with about stories, the linear and the message and, this kind of thing. What's your advice when it comes to storytelling for writers? Using stories to help make their points, or whether it's to even maybe entertain or teach something. What have you found is useful? Because what I've seen is, I know storytelling is powerful, but stories seem like the water we swim in. They're like invisible almost, right? from our own experience, but people, when we tell them, often connect with them. They resonate very powerfully. But how can we, as writers who are aspiring to connect with and serve others in some way, really find our own stories and use them effectively?
Yeah. That's, I feel inadequate to answer that question because it's one I struggle with a lot. I'm not sure that because when I started this whole process, I was deeply immersed in the academic world, and which this was not a mainstream thing to do. You were supposed to write in a way that was academic and scholarly. And so to break away from that really took a lot of belief in that the way I was writing was something of value. Mm-hmm. And it was went against the current. I had to this is the first book I wrote, which was storytelling of clinical encounters. And it was something that was I couldn't get much support for in terms of my own people that I worked with in the clinical field, but it was so I had to really believe that it was a good way for learning for me, but also for teaching, and that people.
I'm sorry, and for those of you who are listening, Stephen just showed me a copy of his book, Multicultural Encounters. So talking about using this as a way of introducing storytelling, but still trying to walk that academic or clinical line. It sounds like you didn't receive a lot of support for back then.
No, it's never been a mainstream, part of the field. I have taught a course at Stanford called Narrative Psychology, and so there is a recognition that there is something in the field that is at least can be useful at the university level, and it's something academic about it, and but it's still hardly a mainstream thing. But it's something that I have continued to use, and I think there's a fine line apparently between writing stories also in terms of when they become personal, and that when that story becomes a indulgent or a self-indulgent story in the way that you tell it, and that there's a lack of power in that, but that there's a power in if you can tell a story in a way that it is clearly what is most deeply personal is also universal. So that I think this at the very beginning of today's interview, you used an expression like that about the universal, that these are universal themes in my book, and yet they're told with particular stories that are unique to me. These are my stories. And so that's, to me, the beauty of a story, is if you can use your deepest personal experiences and insights in a way that connects and clearly shows that this is nothing just strangely about me as this peculiar person. It is my particular experience, but I tell it in a way that I only want to tell it because I know that it relates to you. I believe that this is a human experience, despite all the particulars that are there, and I believe that you too have this experience in your own way, and I want to tell the story in a way that it just goes right into you, and you go, oh yes, that's my story. His mother's Japanese and his father's Irish, but that's his particulars. But the human part, the deepest human value that he's trying to represent in the story that's my story too, because I'm.
Yeah. As a practical matter of organizing your content and organizing your book, because I think this is what a lot of people are, I won't say stuck, but maybe don't know where to begin. And we're talking about stories. So you have these concepts that you want to, flesh out, you want to share about. One way you want to share is stories. Other ways is research. Other ways is drawing on other thinkers, right? And then your own kind of exposition and what you want to say about it. But will you kind of break down or walk us through, me and anyone listening, through your process? I mean, how do you, from the time you want to write a book about any given subject, in this case, of course, it was Heartfulness, how do you start to go through that process of figuring out what is it that I'm going to say? How do I outline it and organize it? Then how do I start to kind of, for lack of a better term, hang, these components on that skeleton, and then start to flesh it out and make it real? How do you make a book? How do you take a book from concept to completion? How do you approach that?
Yeah. Tough question. So I just started a book called The Transformative 20s. And I got what I find is I get a big idea, and then I imagine it as a book, and then I get paralyzed because I think, oh my God, how can I write a whole book on that? And
wait, you do that too? Okay.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And then the voices come in, the critics. So everybody knows that already. And,
Yeah.
there's 100 books about that. And, what makes you think you've got anything unique to say about that? And then all those come in, and then I say, well, let's just start. Let's just start somewhere. And so the whole idea is what I want to understand how people navigate these difficult years after, post-adolescence or continued adolescence or late adulthood, or these traumatic, potentially years in which you could either be dead or you could be flourishing. I know a young person 2 weeks ago committed suicide, and I know other people who are feeling that they are transformed by the simple ways of experiencing the connectedness that they have with others, and that they feel they find themselves, and that there's all kinds of things going on that in those years, not necessarily confined to the 20s, but that early life period that I want to know more about, and I believe that if I can learn about that more, then I can put something out there that would be a guide to some people to try to get through those years. And so I start and I say, well, what do I know about it? And I say a little bit, because I have been teaching people in that period of time. But a lot of those people are only, I lose connection with them after they graduate from college. They're still only 21, 22 years old. So I said, well, go out and connect with those people and find them. And so I do have a number of former students who are now all the way up to 30 years old, and I still have contact with them. And so I made it into a formalized thing, and I said, can we just sit down, and I want to hear about how your life is going. And so I started to talk to people, and each interview I say, wow, that's a really important thing that other young people would probably love to hear about, how they felt, such despair and such that their life was meaningless, and that they were doing just self-destructive behaviors, and then
that was me, totally.
That was you, right?
It was.
Well,
yeah, I could have used that book like 20 years ago.
Yeah, and one thing I say to the students the other day in the classes was, I realize I do this because I've seen so many people wake up later in life, and it could be even before they die, but and often it takes something really, really hard to wake us up to the value of our life, and it could be a life-threatening illness, or it could be a despair that drives us to feel suicidal. It could be, something very hard, though. And I said, and I know that's how we learn the best, but I'm hoping that if we can somehow, in a less dramatic way, learn these values in life in not such a harsh manner, that we may have a better chance for really living a good life. And that's why I'm here in this room, and that's why I bring people who know more than I do about how you get to that place and how you get out of that place, and because they've experienced things I haven't experienced. And I forget where I was going with that, but
we were talking about how you approach a book from tip to tail, and saying you've got this concept and you want to write it, and you have this self-doubt, and then you move forward and you start interviewing people, and so you're getting some clarity perhaps and some material.
Yeah.
So maybe part of this is, how do you start to organize that? How do you particularly keep yourself organized? Do you like to print things and keep them in folders? Do you use Word or Google Drive or something else, Evernote, Trello, Scrivener, something like that? Like, what are the kind of tactical things that you do as you move into, the creative process?
Yeah. I find it's helpful to do things in steps, in the sense that I think many book ideas should never become books. And certainly you see a lot of criticism about writers that, well, they said everything in the introduction or the first chapter, and then they just stretched it out into a whole book. And I think a lot of books should never become books. That it's so it's good to start with articles. It's good to start with essays. It's good to start with blogs. It's good to start somewhere, and then you may discover that, oh, this connects to this other thing I wrote, and that it is becoming more than what it is becoming a book. And in other cases, you may find, I think I've run out of this idea. I thought it was this kind of a book, this theme, but it just seemed like it's not really going to be a whole book. And then you might redirect yourself. You say, but this seems to be developing this theme, and now I can go in that direction. And so I like to write short. So I find the blogs very helpful. I find essays very helpful. Some of them are just like 300 words. I read a lot of 450, 500 word articles, and usually less than 1,000 words I find are very, very good writing exercises to bring clarity to my thoughts, and that they can then become building blocks towards something.
Yeah, plus one benefit of that is you also get to see how people respond to it, right? What they comment, what the people who will say when they read it, and what a great opportunity. That just makes so much sense. What do you think is important for writers to know or do when it comes to technology?
Technology. I don't use a lot of technology, so I'm not really sure. And in fact, I find it's extremely helpful for me to print out as I write. So even if I'm writing a 450 word essay, I might print it out 8 times, or I repeatedly print it out, because I just see it differently and better on paper, and see it in its entirety rather than the little bit you can see on the screen. And I always find that I can write it better if I can see it. So I still use a lot of old-fashioned techniques in that sense. I will sometimes write on paper still too, because I find that I did say I write almost always in my room, but it's not completely true. I will sometimes write outside. But generally, even in my room, if I'm finding somehow I just feel moved to write it with pen and paper, and it somehow brings up something that feels, maybe it's a kind of romantic image of a writing rather than writing on a keyboard. And but something comes up. Technology. I'm not sure what else. I do carry my laptop with me all the time, and I'm always able to write whenever I have some time. I don't write on my iPhone. I don't write on my. I don't have a iPad or anything. I'm not very savvy with tech. I think a lot of people are using far better.
Well, what I love about that is despite not being savvy with tech, you get it done, right? That's the thing. You cross the finish line, you get it out into the world, and so the means is sometimes interesting and useful, but I think ultimately all of us, like with pretty much everything in life, find our own way. So let me ask you this about creating sentences. What are the qualities of a great sentence, and how can we write more of them?
I write very simply, and I think that's something I've been practicing haiku lately, and I practice it with the students too, and I think it's very helpful for people who think that writing has to be complex, and the more complex, the better. And the haiku really helps to develop this sense of clarity with a few words. And I'm always going for simplicity in the writing, and I feel I don't enjoy writing something that somebody else can't understand, and that they're using words that a person, to say with a high school education, would not understand. I don't like doing that, and I think it's also, I want my writing to be in sentences that are readable to a lot of people, and they could understand them. And so when I feel like I'm writing well, then I feel like the sentences are very clear, and that people are not going to read them and think, "Wow, I don't know what sounds good, but I don't understand it."
I don't know what this guy's pointing to. No, that makes sense. I remember hearing that advice as well, as that writing at a certain erudite level, writing is such a way that's so academic or highfalutin is ineffective in communicating as, writing at such a rudimentary level that it loses the richness or depth.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Well, okay, I know we're just about at time here, so I just want to ask one final question. What advice or encouragement would you leave anyone listening to this with when it comes to them getting their book or whatever writing project they're involved in, or any creative project perhaps? I know I've just broadened that. But what advice or encouragement would you give to somebody who's either thinking about beginning, has wanted to do it, but maybe hasn't known where to start, or is in the middle of it and hasn't managed to this point to bring it over the finish line?
Yeah. Maybe I'll share another book of mine with you then, which is the title is When Half is Whole, and it has the image of a half moon on the cover. And it's, I thought of it just now because I think we all have so much of ourselves that is in the shadows still.
Yeah.
And that what's in there is something that with courage, we can discover. But that it's not going to be easy to go there, because a lot of that, it's in the shadows for reasons that we have put it there. And some of that could be, though, the greatest sources of what we find is powerful in our writing.
Yeah.
So I think I believe you can go there, if you can go there to those places that are still unknown to you, and some of that is going to be your own abilities too. You might find that people have told you, "Oh no, don't. Writing is not important," or do this because this is more important, or have told you you're not a good writer, but maybe they were wrong. But there's a lot in that, the discovery of what you don't know yet about yourself, and that could be, if you can take the journey to go there, and then you can find that there's a lot that you can write about that no one else can write about, but that it's a tough journey. It's the hero's journey, and it's not something you would undertake lightly and say, "I'm going to write a book." But knowing that process is going to be difficult, but also it could be liberating, it could be joyful, it could be help you to realize your potential, as a human being, and so to see it as something that is a really meaningful thing that you could be doing in your life.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
I know I said that was the last question. I'm just my own curiosity. I just want to ask, do you prefer writing in English or Japanese?
I prefer English because my expression, I'm not a completely equal bilingual. So I write better in English. And I find that the Japanese is more of I feel some revelations in that because of the it pushes me to write in a different way. I think even simpler than the English, because I have less options, and I find that the clarity at sometimes, or the simplicity at sometimes can feel like it doesn't have enough there, but at other times it can feel like it just cuts right to the message or to the feeling. And sometimes it just helps me to say it more simply, and that there's a beauty in that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Stephen, thank you again. Thank you so much for making time to share with me and with everybody listening of your experience and of your knowledge, and I would even say of your wisdom. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've taken away so much, and I think anyone who's made it, especially to this part in the conversation, has as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life, explore life's big questions, create answers for yourself in community, get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.